Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
I'm Mark Smith from the Microsoft Research Community Technologies Group. We have with us today Jeff Ubois, who for many years has been, for me, the go-to guy for a range of topics. Today he will be talking to us about the future of TV as it moves onto the internet, a very topical theme, I think, in particular, given that in the last 3 or 4 months, it seems even less time, but maybe it's about a quarter, that we've seen the emergence of video hosted on the internet as a major end-user application. Systems like video.google and YouTube come to mind, but clearly something is afoot in the world of video and digital video, and Jeff is going to give us some insight into that. With that, I'll turn things over to Jeff Ubois. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me up, and thanks for having me here. I'll be very interested to hear your reactions and feedback and questions. I'll go for probably about an hour talking about television as memory and some of the social and technical and business issues around that and around the move from standard television to television on the internet. I'm going to focus mainly on what is at least supposed to be nonfiction, news and educational video as well. I want to do a quick tour through some of what I think are the more interesting organizations and cooler products, and then wrap up with some research questions that might be interesting to pursue here, that I think you have good resources to pursue here. So just to start with the obvious point, television really is the culture. I don't know who the average people are, but apparently the numbers from various researchers suggest that people watch 4 hours a day or 1,800 hours of TV per year. It's more time than people spend in school. It's the primary forum for public debate. It is probably our most vivid and compelling historical record. And just as a question, how many people here do watch TV news every day or see some element of it? So even here in the all digital world, people are still hooked into the television networks. And almost every aspect of television is in transition as things move from analog to digital. There's a move from RF to IP, from NTSC to high definition, from tape to disc, which I think is huge and in some ways underrated. It changes the way access to large libraries of video happens. You're familiar, I'm sure, with the move from scheduled to unscheduled and from long form to short form video. Where people watch TV is moving. It's moving away from just the tube in the living room to the cell phone and to the projector and to the PC. There's some structural things that are happening to television as well. In particular, there's a move away from free local broadcasting to fee-based broadcasts and to global access to what have been local programs. There's a move from a broadcast to a social medium where more people are becoming not just consumers but producers of video. And there's a move from ephemeral to permanent, which I think is an interesting thing to pull on. When you start to pull on that ephemeral to permanent issue, all kinds of things about the future of television, I think, get to be a lot clearer. So ephemerality has been kind of the default mode for television for years. 40 years ago, Lyndon Johnson got up, and I'll read this just for the benefit of anybody listening only. Lyndon Johnson got up at the National Association of Broadcasters and said, unlike the printed media, television writes on the wind. There's no accumulated record which the historian can examine later with a 20/20 vision of hindsight, asking these questions. How fair was he tonight? How impartial was he today? How honest was he all along? Well, archivists tend to evaluate the qualities of a record system in terms of preservation and access, and this is almost the antithesis of that, the ephemeral system that Lyndon Johnson described. And our intuitions about the media, or at least my intuitions about the media, have been formed largely in the world of print. So when I started looking at television, I was confronted with all these kind of counterintuitive phenomenon. Right now, I can go back and I can look up New York Times articles from 1865, and it's fairly trivial to do. But if I want to see what was on the news a week ago, or 20 years ago, or 50 years ago, it's really, really hard. And I think that most people expect that television will disappear rather quickly. In fact, political figures tend to rely on that, and they suffer when the Orwellian memory hole suddenly disgorges something that they said earlier.
Said in the past that it was, quote, pretty well confirmed.
No, I never said that.
Okay, I think that is...
Absolutely not.
Absolutely never said that.
It's been pretty well confirmed that he did go to Prague and he did meet with a senior official of the Iraqi intelligence service in Czechoslovakia last April.
Now, that kind of access, that kind of research is actually fairly exceptional. That's not the usual state of affairs. The Daily Show was able to find that footage. They were willing to risk showing it in an uncertain copyright environment. The clip was available online. I didn't find that by hitting the record button on my PVR or on my television. I found that online, and it'll probably be available for a very long time as a result. Some individual made that and posted it to the net. What's normal is actually a much more closed system. A lot of what has been broadcast since commercial television went on the air is in fact gone for good. And we're not going to get it back. Broadcasts are not always preserved. Preserved broadcasts are typically very difficult to access. Long-term preservation isn't always well managed. Broadcasts can't be reused even in classrooms, mainly due to copyright restrictions. And so the question came up for me a couple of years ago, how bad is it? So at a high level, if things go badly, 70% of the material that has been recorded and put away on shelves will become unreadable and unusable by 2025. And there are a bunch of reasons for that. I use the word putrefaction there because there's something called vinegar syndrome. Acetate-based media degrades, and if you walk into a badly managed, uncontrolled archive of film or tape, you will smell the decay. So the 70% of all material disappearing by 2025 may be, kind of a worst-case scenario, but it's very clear that even the material that's well preserved is at risk. It needs to be migrated. It needs to be managed. It needs to move from tape to disk, and it needs to move from disk to disk as hard drives age and change. Preservation is important because it circumscribes what possibilities there are for future access. If things are not preserved in the first place, they go away. There are also a lot of other access problems, though, and that's what I started to look at. I took a grant from the Cale Austin Foundation and spent a year at UC Berkeley, in part looking at a particular case that I think illuminates the issues of access and preservation and use. And the case was Murphy Brown versus the Vice President. I don't know if everybody here remembers that, but there was this kind of funny interaction between Dan Quayle, who was apparently a real VP, and Murphy Brown, who was a fictional character. And this was one of the clips.
Murphy Brown of the popular TV sitcom of the same name. On this week's episode, TV newscaster Brown, who's played by Candice Bergen, gave birth. Some of her friends were present, but the father was nowhere in sight.
It doesn't help matters when primetime TV has Murphy Brown, a character who supposedly epitomizes today's intelligent, highly paid professional woman, mocking the importance of fathers by bearing a child alone and calling it just another lifestyle choice.
Now, that was Britt Hume, by the way. Well, this actually turned into a national story. It was quite the media firestorm in 1992. I won't show all the footage that I gathered around this, but the president was asked questions while standing with the group of 8. There was a series of backing away from and agreeing with what the vice president's comments were, and it ran. This story ran as the top of the news story on CBS and the other networks the next night.
Good evening, Dan Rather reporting. The Bush-Quayle re-election campaign appeared to be in disarray today over the fray created by Vice President Quayle's carefully orchestrated attack on the Murphy Brown TV show. The Vice President insisted again today that the fictional character Murphy Brown's fictional single motherhood promoted bad values. He originally said it in the context of what has happened in Los Angeles. President Bush first seemed to agree, then suddenly disagreed, and then began distancing himself. Bill Leggett.
So why would you want to go back and, why was this a reasonable use case? Well, this is something that cuts across a lot of different academic disciplines. So if you want to look at it from the standpoint of what somebody in a university might want to go looking for in the historical records provided by television news, this is a good one. It touches on journalism, it touches on sociology, it touches on gender relations, it touches on race, it touches on the history of the LA riots. So it's this public debate about morality and social issues that exists actually in a whole bunch of different places. It's scattered around. There are different owners of the footage. That footage is held under a wide variety of different IP regimes. There are public comments by the vice president. There's news. There's entertainment footage. All of those are treated differently under copyright law. All of them tend to be collected by different types of institutions. All of them are indexed differently. So trying to reconstruct this interaction from primary sources was kind of my use case to illustrate where we are in terms of having an archival system that works and having a legal system that allows educators to get access to it. And after quite a bit of digging around, it became apparent that, well, first of all, there's no union catalog. This isn't like print media. I found reference to 900 clips online. About 100 were available, actually a little less. And very often the ones that were known to exist were very difficult to get access to or not available for use. So for example, the original speech by Dan Quayle took place at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco. The Commonwealth Club had that for sale on their website. When I tried to buy it, they said, well, we've transferred that footage to the Hoover Institution. I went to the Hoover Institution and I said, well, can I get a copy of our vice president? And they said, we can't give it to you. Partly we're waiting to digitize it, but the real issue is copyright. We can't provide pictures of your vice president due to copyright law. I went to Warner Brothers and I said, well, you had this interaction with the vice president. It's kind of important for educational use. I'm at UC Berkeley. Will you please let me get a copy of the footage for classroom use? And they wrote back and said, well, this episode, you say potato, it's not available. When footage was available, it tended to be very, very expensive. NBC wanted $20 per second with a 30-second minimum, and that's just for non-broadcast, non-promotional, educational use. So what do we learn from this? Well, first of all, reconstruction from primary sources of any major news event like this is just about impossible. And then the second point is this is not atypical. This is a good example. I think someone who worked on Eyes on the Prize will be here soon, which is exciting. Eyes on the Prize was the best civil rights documentary ever done, I think, and it relied on news footage, 350 different clips that were licensed for 10 years. The people that put that program together had a very limited budget. And so they licensed use of the clips for 10 years, dating from about 1987. So in 1997, it was no longer possible to broadcast Eyes on the Prize. It was no longer possible for a library or a university to buy a copy. The Ford Foundation put up $60,000 to someone just to figure out how to clear the rights. And since then, there's been a collection of $850,000 to buy back the rights necessary for just this one documentary series. So I think you can make the argument that television is copyrighted in ways that make it fundamentally inaccessible. There's a funny little coda to this. So I wrote up these results and I went to a publication about digital libraries and I showed them the paper I wanted to publish, and it included a lot of back and forth with archives that maintained entertainment and news and public footage. And they looked at it and they told me that all of the email I had received in the course of this project, which documented the accessibility or inaccessibility of these clips, was copyrighted. And they did not want to cross the line of even publishing that mail. I went to the law clinic at UC Berkeley and they argued with the editors there saying, well, no, it's not copyrighted. But it didn't do any good. So what I'd like to do is kind of jump back up a level and talk about why this matters. I want to convince people here that you have an opportunity to improve things in the public space a lot more than you might think. I don't think it's all that often that you can throw technology at a social problem and actually do a lot of good. But I think this is an instance, particularly around the issue of news, where you can really create some broad social improvements by offering improvements in technology. So I want to just walk through some of these examples. So the first one, I would guess a lot of people here saw. It was the demise of the Crossfire show. It's another Jon Stewart clip. It was an example of somebody, Jon Stewart went on Crossfire, which was a CNN talk show, and argued basically that it wasn't useful as a public forum, and he did it in a very humorous way. The transcript was posted, and it was an interesting read, but when the clips were posted, it became much more vivid. It was clear that the audience was going along with Mr. Stewart in ways that it was not going along with Tucker Carlson. And CNN canceled the show. So it provided, having television make it online allowed for there to be a discussion about the quality of that production and allowed the network to respond, I think, in a very interesting way. Second, news that's online is verifiable. It's at least creatively juxtaposed, like with Mr. Cheney, but there are a lot of other examples where things that are asserted on television can be fact-checked against other footage. So, for example, about a year ago, I think now, a few hundred tons of explosives disappeared in Iraq. There was an assertion that those explosives were already gone by the time U.S. troops arrived. And then a television station in the Midwest happened to have footage of that facility when all the explosives were there. I mean, it was a great moment of fact-checking that would have been hard to do in print. There was an image there that was hard to refute. Similarly, there was the "I never met you before tonight, Mr. Edwards." Again, refuted with the image rather than with words. When material becomes online, you can also trace it back to its source. Broadcast organizations tend to be very poor these days. The people that are making television news don't have a lot of money. And so what they do, like print journals, is they rely on materials that are produced by organizations and corporate entities that they can fold into their broadcasts, and those are called video news releases. There was a kerfuffle about that last year when it turned out that some of the people who were reporting on policies being implemented by the Bush administration were in fact working for Ketchum Public Relations. Now, the GAO ruled that that was illegal, that that wasn't supposed to be going on. There are laws against what the Bush administration was doing. It kind of sank without a trace. I had some back and forth with people on the Kerry. There was a bill that was proposed in Congress in response to this called the Truth in Broadcasting Act. And the Truth in Broadcasting Act was going to require that any time a news organization broadcast footage that had been provided by the U.S. government, that it would include a label, so that you would have kind of this truth in labeling. Well, here's the sugar content of your cereal. That bill, strangely enough, died. I actually proposed to them that they add an archiving provision, and so I was pleased to be able to go and look at the hearing in which Kerry asks the people from the FCC if they could perhaps archive these VNRs. And I'm sorry that that hasn't happened, and I would love to see somebody do a real archive of video news releases, both corporate and governmental. Security. I think high tech has always relied on funding from governments over security issues. The London bombing case was a great example of video making it out from a user base into the world. It kind of mirrored another story that was about 60 years old. Just before the D-Day invasion, the British government sent out a note to their populace saying, if any of you have taken any vacations on French beaches, we'd really like to have the photographs from your vacations. And they got millions of photographs. These photographs are in the Imperial War Museum, and they were able to gauge things like what the sand was like, what the slope was like, where they could land their craft. And it was this kind of collective intelligence done by postal mail and still image, I guess about 60 years before the London bombing. There's another issue about citizenship as video moves online. People take pictures of government in action. And sometimes those aren't very flattering pictures, and sometimes those cause real problems. There have been, I think, a number of cases. I'll mention 4. The first was Utah. There were a bunch of kids dancing in a canyon. The sheriffs showed up in full battle regalia, smashed the cameras of some of the people that were there. Some of the video made it out. There's a court case over this, but that would not have been an interaction with law enforcement that it would have been possible to document previously. In July last year, there was a case in Pennsylvania where a gentleman was videotaping police who were pulling trucks over in what he thought was an unsafe way. The police arrested him, confiscated his film. He took them to court, and the judge ruled against the Pennsylvania police in that, the local police, and awarded compensatory and punitive damages of $41,000, saying that it's really, really important for citizens to be able to scrutinize government officials in action. It was quite a good ruling. It was kind of a surprise. Similar things in New Orleans. There have been a number of cases of reporters being roughed up. And then finally, there's an institution that's actually devoted to this called Witness. Witness collects videos of human rights abuses from around the world and stores and preserves them and makes them available. They're based in New York. And then finally, there's historical perspective that we can get from some of this old footage. I have a clip of Walter Cronkite I want to show a little further in the talk. But basically, the common thread here is that all of these improvements or all of these examples rely on making video referenceable and on making it into a permanent medium from an ephemeral medium, adding an archival dimension. And we're better positioned technically now than we ever have been to do this. So I think, in fact, we could save everything that is broadcast. That is not the norm. But the How Much Information study that Peter Lyman and Hal Varian did found 21,000 stations and 31 million unique hours of broadcast happen every year around the world, and that this equates to 45 to 90 petabytes of data storage. Based on work I've done at the Internet Archive, it looks like that's somewhere between 180 and $360 million worth of spinning disks. So just from a technical perspective, at a high level, hand-waving level, we could save everything that's broadcast. If you contrast that with the worldwide library budget of over $30 billion, it's really not that much money. And the reason for this, one of the reasons why this change has happened, is that the price of storage has dropped by 98% in the last 10 years. About 10 years ago, the Librarian of Congress got together a series of hearings, and they looked at why television was disappearing, and they got just about everything right. They made all the right suggestions. The one thing that they didn't really factor in was this move to disk. And in fact, what's happening now is that a lot of archives are coming online. I think the BBC is probably the world leader in this in terms of putting their material online and making it available. And making it available not just in terms of having it there, but having licenses that people can actually use and work with. CNN and PBS are also in the midst of moving their archives of news online. There's another group of companies that are looking at it from the standpoint of becoming Google for video, or the Yahoo, Blinks, Google, MSN Video. The search companies that have been in the internet space are looking at this as fresh content. And then there are academic organizations and libraries that have been archiving video off air, not always in the most elegant way, but they often have collections that go back for a very long time, where they've been able to collect donations from stations that go out of business or from fanatics that record off air and give them material. And these archives actually serve a very vital function. There's, I think, a conceit sometimes in the commercial world that you don't need more than the commercial broadcasters to preserve what they send out. But in fact, you do. And the reason is that the commercial organizations sometimes become constrained at a future date in terms of what they can provide, sometimes for legal reasons. The Dateline NBC case, I don't know how many people remember this, but it's kind of like, it'd be a great case if you were teaching journalism. NBC wanted to show that when SUVs flipped over, they blew up. And they couldn't quite make it happen. So what they did is they rigged a model rocket engine in the gas feed of one of the SUVs, and then they flipped it over and they set off the rocket. And look, lo and behold, these trucks go up like a straw house. Well, NBC was sued for that, and part of the settlement is they can never show that footage again. So good for GM, maybe bad for the historical record. Even an error is worth looking at. If you want to see the interaction between George Herbert Walker Bush and Dan Rather, there was kind of a famous on-air fight that they had. You can't get it from CBS. It doesn't reflect well on CBS. They don't want to show it. Similar to the NBC Dateline thing, there was a case with Winn-Dixie where Winn-Dixie was filmed doing things that maybe it shouldn't have been doing, but they prevailed in court, and the footage about Winn-Dixie is now no longer a part of the public record, at least as far as if you go to ABC. I want to mention one other organization that I represent from time to time called the Television Archive, and this is sort of a outgrowth of frustration on the part of some people at the Internet Archive. Right now, the Television Archive has a satellite dish pointed at the sky and is recording 20 stations 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at DV quality for about $25,000 per station per year. And I mention this because it is sort of a proof of feasibility, in the sense it's something that you would expect the Library of Congress, which is legally mandated to preserve television, would be devoting more resources to. They don't really have them. In fact, the moving image part of the Library of Congress is highly dependent on foundation funding. They've built a giant new facility in Culpeper that's going to scan 7 to 10 petabytes of data a year, but all this is privately funded by Packard. Hewlett? I want to say Packard. So why is it so hard to make archives available? Why is it so hard to support them? Why is it so hard to have some system that would make this historical record available? Well, the first reason, I think, is economic uncertainty. From the standpoint of the... Yes?
Question about these companies that privately archive the footage.
Yes.
How's the copyright restriction on those archives different than the original broadcast?
It's a mess. That's actually my next slide. Let me do it on my next slide. Okay, so the first thing is that from the standpoint of a broadcaster, footage is priceless, and in two senses. Most archives don't run at a profit. They can't make any money making this material available online. NBC may sell it for $20 a second, but they don't sell enough seconds to really make this a primary line of business for them. In fact, really what it opens up for them is headaches like lawsuits or humiliation or problems with the unions. A lot of the material is produced under union contract, and there are all kinds of horrifically complicated agreements governing reuse of the footage. So on the one hand, it's priceless in that they can't get any price for it, and on the other hand, I think there is a perception that this stuff is incredibly valuable, and it would be a great tragedy and tremendously irresponsible to let it go for a penny less than it's worth. So this kind of simultaneous idea that it is worth $0 and worth an infinite number of dollars is paralyzing. We don't know how to value footage. Between 1951 and 1976, the Ford Foundation put about $289 million into funding public broadcasting. I don't know how much of that actually made it onto film and tape that's carefully preserved. I have no way, and I don't think anybody has a way of figuring out what that $100 million worth of productions is worth now. So if you wanted to sell it, it would be difficult to price. Archives have another problem, which is balancing sustainability and obscurity. So there's a company up here in Seattle called Corbis that actually helps some people in the archival community. They go to an archivist and they say, well, if you will let us digitize some of your material, we'll handle the sales for you. And what tends to happen is that some tiny, tiny fraction of the archive sells many, many times for lots of money, and most of the rest of it doesn't sell, and then it's locked up in a certain way that makes it difficult for other people to access or use. But this balance, or this question of sustainability and the balance of obscurity and And collecting money is very hard to strike. Nobody has it right. What can you give away? What can you sell? There are very few guidelines to help funders and archives make these kinds of decisions. There's an interesting formula that's been around in media for a long time, 70-30. Google's doing that with video. But it's an unproven model. And all of these economic issues are tied up with law and legal risks. I mentioned a few of them. But it's not really clear what can be recorded. It's not clear when it's possible to migrate. If you're making a preservation copy by migrating from one old 2-inch tape to something new, that's okay, but there are limits on the number of migration copies you can make. There are limits on the number of loan copies you can make. The law is very confusing for anyone trying to operate an archive right now. It's also confusing to figure out what's a licensable event. I guess this is being broadcast. We had a discussion early on about whether, if it is made available on the net, do I get sued for that Jon Stewart clip I just showed? Was I supposed to get a license? Was that fair use? We don't really know when a license is actually necessary. That's a question from Rick Pralinger, by the way. I think it's a good one. There is something called Section 108. Section 108 actually speaks directly to your point about recording off air. So in 1968, there was a businessman in Tennessee who decided that he was going to prove that there was a liberal media bias. And he was going to do this by recording all television news and going back and analyzing it. And CBS sued this organization, sued the Vanderbilt Television News Archive, and tried to get them to stop doing it. A long, complicated series of legal events took place that culminated in a special exemption in the Copyright Act of 1976 in Section 108, which says essentially that news footage on television is governed a little differently from the rest of television footage. Libraries and archives can make off-air recordings and make a limited number of copies available for loan for a limited amount of time. Well, what Vanderbilt does is they have a big database of well-described broadcasts, and you can go to Vanderbilt and you can pay them some money. That's in fact where I got the clips of the Quayle and Murphy Brown that I just showed. You can pay them a certain amount of money, they'll make a copy, they'll send you the tape, and then you have to mail it back. And that's sort of a loan circa 1976 or circa 1986, but it's not really clear what that means in a digital environment. Are streams loans? I would love it if somebody could make a convincing argument that streams are loans, especially for news. I don't think streams are the greatest thing ever, but that would at least begin to open up some of these archives to the rest of the world. And then finally, the clearance process is a nightmare. It's very difficult to go back and get clearance. Even when I found footage, or if I was able to get footage during this Murphy Brown case, if I would write to the rights holder, and identifying the rights holder is never very easy or very clear. You know, you think Murphy Brown, so you go to the broadcaster, and then it's Warner Brothers, and then it's, you know, somebody within Warner Brothers, and you send them a letter and they don't write back, and you know, clearance is just really, it's really a nightmare, and it's a problem for anybody that's trying to produce new documentary works or educational video. So maybe there's some technical help that can be applied there. But there are also a bunch of technical problems. I'm just going to go over these really kind of quickly because it's such a... So first is production. What happens during capture? What happens as footage is created? How is it marked? How is it annotated? How do you go back and find what it is? Shooting ratios have changed a lot because videotape is so cheap. It used to be in the days of film that if you were going to make a documentary, you know, you'd shoot 3 or 4 hours of film for every hour of documentary you produced. You carefully planned your shots, and now, you know, shooting ratios are 50-to-1 or 100-to-1. So there's, you know, there's a vast quantity of material now that's being produced that no one ever sees. In fact, there's a kind of a changing sensibility among a lot of producers and a lot of archives to marry the sensibility of archivists into the production process early. Publishing. How do you get your material out into the world? The net really changes that. It's possible to throw something up on a peer-to-peer network as if you were a major network now, in ways that you couldn't do back in the old analog television days. Translations and standards. Right now, actually, well, I don't mean to be rude, but I went looking at the MSN. I went looking at video.msn.com last night. I can't look at it. I need to install IE6, which isn't made for the machine that I have. There are a lot of different standards and formats for video, and as those change and more people lose things, people even in libraries, smart people in libraries may decide that they're going to make a collection based on the latest, greatest, coolest codec, and then they get marooned as something else.
So
yes.
What machine are you using, and what kind of video formats? Okay.
So it requires IE6, which is not produced for this. So it's Flash video, which...
Flash video is the easiest for you to see then, right?
Yeah. Flash is reasonable. Flash seems to have really taken over. It's kind of interesting to see. I would say just in the last year, Flash has kind of become the standard, I think partly because it's got a dodge for people in terms of copyright. They're not providing, it's kind of that R streams loans thing. So it gives a little bit of protection. It's in a lot of the browsers. I'm not a huge fan because it's hard to reference. I'll talk about that a little more later, but it's hard to go in. If you have a long broadcast, it's hard to go in the middle of it. If you look at what some of the people who index video do, when they index documents, they can point to an area within a document and they can find it. But when they put things up on the net, their material is not accessible in the same way. Finding and provenance. Tracking where things have been, finding them, discovering them. Both of those are hard problems that I think you might apply some resources to here. And then finally, preservation. Tape rots, disks go bad. It's necessary to migrate from one to another. So basically, the reason why we don't have a good archival system, I would argue, is because technology and law and economics are all interacting in these complex ways that are very difficult to untangle. And at the same time, there are a bunch of wild cards and social choices that may not be optimal. We have fairly dismal funding for public broadcasting in this country. In the US, we spend about $1.49 per head. In the UK, it's $83 per head. It's not a coincidence that the BBC has a much more accessible and useful and interesting archive of its footage. Related to this may be the end of free universal service. When television first came on the scene, there were probably people who were making utopian pitches about how good news was going to be and how much it would enlighten everyone. And there was a deliberate intent to make sure that it was universally provided. We're moving away from that now. There's a public debate over copyright. It's hard to see how that's going to shake out in a way that favors more open access for archivists now. At least it doesn't seem to be going in that direction. And at the same time, there's a transition to video as a social medium and as a fan culture. One of the trends that's happened in moving image archiving, if you want to look at the future of what's going to happen to television, you can look at film. And film, for a long time, had two types of archivists. It had the respectable, well-funded archivists that tended to be supported by studios and large institutions, and it had little communities of fanatics. And the fanatics really cared a lot. They didn't always follow exactly proper procedure. They were dangerous to some of the existing archives. They couldn't be seen as being too friendly with these people because the people who wrote the big checks to support the large archives didn't really like people making extra copies of their films and holding material in an uncontrolled way. And what happened with film was, in fact, these fans became heroes when it became apparent that they were holding some of the only existing copies of some of the classic films. And so that's happening in television now. There's something called Missing, Believed, Wiped that the BBC is running, where they send out, here are the top 25 missing television broadcasts. Did anybody happen to tape them? And they found all kinds of things. They found things like, somebody didn't make a copy of the video, but they hooked up, as a kid, sound recordings. So there's all kinds of fun old science fiction films from the 1960s that you can get now, in part because these communities of fans preserved what the existing institutions didn't. And then finally, part of the result of all this change is there's a massive round of new investment going into companies and organizations, mainly commercial companies. And I just want to do kind of a quick rundown of some of them. Mark and I were talking earlier about YouTube, this kind of Flickr for video. When Flickr was purchased, everybody and his brother thought, wow, we could do that for video. And there are something like 90 hosting companies out there now. There's really a lot of them. I don't think they're terribly differentiated. Many of them are rolling the dice with copyright. They're exploring different methods of funding what they're doing. YouTube seems to have the most traffic. They're pumping out on the order of 200 terabytes a day worth of traffic, getting 2 million visitors a month, and growing really, really quickly. The Vanderbilt Television Archive I mentioned earlier, they've been archiving news since 1968. They live under the Section 108 exemption. They're really underfunded. They get by on sunlight and dirt and water, as near as I can tell. And they've been through a series of migrations from different formats of tapes to disk, and they're getting a lot better at that, and they're trying to think through some of the issues of access. But I think there is an opportunity for someone to help them make that footage more accessible. In the end, they are frustrated, I think, by the reality that shipping video around on the net is still very expensive. They're shipping tapes. BitTorrent, again, I would guess. How many people here have downloaded stuff with BitTorrent, downloaded video? Okay, so Azuri, what's that?
None of us will admit to
I've
that.
been downloaded legal content.
Oh, of course.
Well, yeah.
Is there any other kind?
BitTorrent's trying to go legal, right? There was a great headline in Silicon Valley Watcher, which was MPAA to BitTorrent. Bram decided to see things our way after I threatened to eat his brain. Which I don't know. I found highly amusing. But BitTorrent has to begin to look at issues of finding and payment. One of the uses for it was actually, again, Eyes on the Prize. When it looked like Eyes on the Prize was going to remain locked up, some of the people at Downhill Battle put it up on BitTorrent, which didn't actually surprise. It didn't actually please the producers, but it was kind of an interesting routing around of the whole copyright regime there. There are a lot of other peer-to-peer networks that are trying to get something going in a similar way. The Open Media Network is based on Contiki, which VeriSign just bought. The Open Media Network has been very successful in the public broadcasting system. The public broadcasting system commissioned a long report on digital television, which came out in December. It was written by Mr. Barksdale. And oddly enough, Mike Homer, his old colleague, made the Open Media Network available for free to all the people in public broadcasting, and they're offering digital rights management for public broadcasting on the Open Media Network, which I just find so interesting. There are a bunch of other little venture-funded companies that are also trying to do peer-to-peer. Rawflow, Red Swoosh, VO, Bright Cove, and even I would argue Akamai. So there are a lot of people working on this. I think it's really clear that P2P will be very important for distribution, but so will some of the big server farms. Google Video, I don't know what you think of the user interface. It seems like it's a little bit like they're learning. But they have server capacity. They have bandwidth. It tends to run pretty fast. They have the revenue model of splitting income with producers on a 70-30 basis. So if you put something up for sale, you can sell it through Google, and they will split the money with you 70-30. They've done some public-spirited work. They have digitized a lot of the films that are held at the National Archives. The National Archives actually gave them a room in the basement to do this. They're also mixing content and metadata in an interesting way. When you think of how you go out and find a web page, excluding the cache, the indices or the indexes of material are independent from the holder of content. But when you have the person who has the product be the person who also describes the product, you start to get into kind of conflicts like, well, this content is really the best. So I'll be very curious to see how this decision to host content, which hasn't been a part of the culture there, changes how the searches work. I think we were already seeing that a little bit in that it's very hard to get into a particular time slice of video that's hosted at Google. A lot of other people are trying to do this, Yahoo, Apple, MSN. But I am also concerned or interested to see how what has been sort of the nonprofit function of a cultural institution gets subsumed by commercial organizations. That's sort of a social design question. It'll be very interesting to see how that shakes out. FeedRoom is one of a number of companies that's producing VNRs. It's making it easy for you to take control of your image online, of your video image online. That's kind of the promise here. In fact, if you go to FeedRoom, I don't know, did people see the Robert Greenwald movie about Walmart? Anyway, Robert Greenwald did the film Outfoxed, in which he threw an army of people at their televisions and said, everybody record and annotate an hour of Fox per day. And he did a similar thing with Walmart. So this Walmart movie is basically, it's a 100-count indictment against the company, and about 60 of the indictments kind of make you go, oh, and about 20 of them make you yawn, because any big company will have to behave that way, and 20 he probably shouldn't have included. But you can see Walmart's direct response to this movie on FeedRoom, and it's actually very interesting to watch their spinmeisters sort of look very uncomfortable and try to take the dialogue in a certain direction. The news market, PR Newswire's Multiview and MediaLink are other examples of services that are making VNRs available online. I don't know of anybody non-commercial who is collecting these. JumpTV is interesting to me. They're aggregating global news from around the world. Link TV does that. There's something called Schola, which is hard to access, that a college in Iowa, I think it's Jesuits, collect mainly for foreign language education. If you want to learn how to speak a foreign language, you can watch the foreign broadcasts. So Schola provides things to the language school in Monterey and other places. Dabble is a Berkeley company. It is trying very hard not to be a hosting company. It's about annotation and metadata for clips that are online. It's community-based, and it's a finding aid. It's also in part, or you can begin to think of it as something like an edit decision list. I want to show a clip from this service, contrast it with a clip from this service, and then wrap it up with a clip from a third. So being able to point at lots of different things and repackage them and remix them and pull them together is what Dabble's about. I think it's small, it's early, but the approaches that they're taking I think are very, very interesting and forward-thinking. I'm actually trying to do some work with the company. Snowcap. Snowcap is almost like a karmic cleanup operation. Sean Fanning started this after Napster, and he got very familiar with all the horrors related to rights clearance, and decided that was the business he wanted to get in because it was such a terrible problem. It's pretty clear that pools of content work. I don't know how Snowcap per se will do, but the idea that you'd create large online pools of content, I think, makes a lot of sense. There's a company called Keepvid, which is about translating streams. It's almost like clipping barbed wire that's locking content into one little part of the range so that you can save things locally. Another saying from Rick Pralinger, who runs the Pralinger Archive, is that streams are for sissies. Rick was the first person to put up large quantities of moving images online. He was essentially a stock footage house. He collected 45,000 ephemeral films. He digitized a few hundred of them and put them online. And the result of that, he says, has been a big increase in his revenues. That since 2000, when he started putting films online, which was a very scary and threatening thing to do for a stock footage house, revenue's gone up 62%. So Rick's perspective is that you should make media downloadable and put it in standard formats rather than leave it in streams. And what Keepvid and what a lot of other little utilities, kind of for the analog hole, for lack of a better term, do is take video from online and make it possible to either edit it or remix it or put it on your iPod or whatever. I have a whole bunch of Runnersup that didn't make that first cut. Lulop and Scooped are basically services for citizen journalists. If you happen to be seeing a celebrity on the Malibu beach and you have your cell phone with you, you can take that picture and you can sell it via Lulop. Rocket Boom has gotten a lot of attention. It's a 3-minute show that's kind of a, let's put on our own show. It's in New York, and it's a small production company, and it's gotten attention as sort of an example, an early example of what a small group of people with a small amount of money can do. PVRs are changing. Sling, I have not looked at closely. I would like to talk with people here about what you think about Sling and the Windows Media Center. For commercial resale, video monitoring service has been going for decades. They've gone around and they've purchased a lot of mom and pop operations that watched broadcast news locally for your ad to make sure that it ran, or for your son on the local television news scoring the home run for the home team. FootageNet handles things for CNN as well. I don't know, frankly, I haven't looked deeply at the mobile content market. There's clearly a lot of venture funding that's going into it. There are a lot of people that seem to think that it's going to be hot. I haven't won with my video iPod. I haven't found the killer app for it myself. And then there are a lot of online video stores. Akimbo is probably the biggest of them, but DaveNet and Bingo and Orb are also going. So I don't want to go too on with this list, but I thought they were worth a quick mention. And I suppose the real question here at Microsoft is which ones to buy or imitate and which to ignore. And I won't go into that really, but I'd like to wrap up before we do Q&A with some research questions that I think you could address and really maybe improve the state of the art. So first is long-term preservation. It's hard to manage the media on which video lives. It's hard to migrate it. It's hard to replicate it. It's hard to make sure that there's good data integrity around that. And I think that's something that's common to all digital objects that you deal with all the time. Digital objects tend to be very fragile. If you wrap them with DRM, they break. You can't get access to them again later. It's 10 times worse than the old tape machines that find themselves out in the street in front of the television station, leaving behind hundreds or thousands of tapes that can't be played. So addressing the long-term preservation issue, I think, is going to be a huge opportunity for somebody. It's an unsolved problem. There was another report out looking at audio archives that just came out from the Council on Library and Information Resources, saying that our audio archives are at risk too. And you can often get a sense of what's going to happen with video by looking either at sound recordings or at film. So I think that's an important problem. A second one is economic models. I just was co-producer for a conference at MIT on the economics of open content. And we spent a couple of days talking about it, and different people had different opinions. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of overlap. There's a fairly broad diversity of opinion. Some of the people in the PBS stations at the working level say, well, look, we've always supported ourselves as an open content provider through memberships and sponsorships. We don't need to do anything different, which I think is, it's actually an interesting thing to say when the technology providers are walking in and saying, we have the open media network with digital rights management, we can help you as PBS collect money. So I think it's kind of gutsy in that sort of we are a public service organization, not a media conglomerate stance on the part of the public stations to think in terms of memberships and sponsorships as a funding model for the future. Other people are looking at compulsory licensing. Terry Fisher, William Fisher at Harvard, has got a lot of ideas about big pools of content that might be shared. Other people look more towards the iTunes or Google model where you pay by the SIP. On the production side, there's a theme that I've been working with on called Open Production Initiatives, and the idea is that you can bring an archival sensibility to productions, but archives to survive need to be seen and loved, and footage that is viewed tends to be preserved. Footage that is put on shelves and forgotten tends to rot. So if you're running an archive, or if you have a large collection of video, bringing a production sensibility into your organization is actually a good one because it inspires you to put your best stuff out there. And part of that is to have new productions made out of archival footage, sometimes by having different archives cooperate. Intelligent Television is working right now on a documentary about the Suez Crisis in 1957. We're kind of coming up on the 50-year anniversary of this. And there's footage that the British have, and the Americans have, and the French have, and the Egyptians have, and various archives in each of those 4 countries have agreed that they're going to combine what they have in order to produce a documentary about the Suez Crisis. So that isn't exactly an economic model, but it's a shift in how productions are created and in the economics of how productions are created. Finally, provenance and attribution. This is, I think, maybe one of the best problems that people could work on now. After 9/11, there was a lot of news footage that showed Palestinians dancing in the streets. And everybody said, oh, Palestinians are dancing in the streets. That shows what's going on there. And then some people said, no, wait, that footage is 10 years old. And it's from a station in Brazil. And it's got nothing to do with 9/11. And there was an argument about this that raged for a few days. And in the end, it appeared that, in fact, the Palestinians were dancing after 9/11. But it took days to resolve. There are still people who are unconvinced. There's no chain of custody. There's no system to really verify where footage came from in cases like that. And it's important because the things that we care most about make it onto the news, and people form their opinions and base their actions on what they see. You know, moving images kind of go right back into the back of your brain and give you an emotional reaction before you can even think about them. So being able to verify that they're real in some sense is important. That gets worse as video is remixed. It's 100 times harder to pull out that little 2-second clip from something as it is to look at a longer form production that has got some people standing behind it. That also, the lack of provenance and attribution also makes it much more difficult to go back and make something new. If as a documentary film producer, you have to get insurance to show that you've done clearance, and you have to provide certificates of clearance to broadcasting networks and to your insurance company, it gets a lot harder when you can't find out who owns a piece of footage. Where do you license it from? It's really hard. We don't know how much news is based on video news releases. It would be nice to go back and see where it's from. Can we have an archive of video news releases so that we could see where television news is really coming from and see who's paying for it? Can we challenge some of the hidden economies that are kind of woven into news productions by having a good, robust system of provenance and attribution? And then finally, I think it's interesting to look at DRM. DRM poses a lot of problems for people in the library and archiving world. It tends to make things unreadable in the future. But DRM is actually serving several different things all at once, or it's intended to, or it's promised as a solution. I'm skeptical about how good a solution it will be, but one of the things that DRM is supposed to do is provide attribution. And I think that it would be possible to have systems of attribution that don't necessarily involve breaking the players and the libraries and the archives of the future. So we're nearly at an end here. I want to close by kind of going back to why it matters. And that's really, I think, about why history and public discourse matter. I found the following clip in a remainder bin at a used bookstore. But this clip actually changed history, and I'll tell you after we watch it why.
Draw. This summer's almost certain standoff will either end in real give and take negotiations or terrible escalation. And for every means we have to escalate, the enemy can match us. And that applies to invasion of the North, the use of nuclear weapons, or the mere commitment of 100 or 200 or 300,000 more American troops to the battle. And with each escalation, the world comes closer to the brink of cosmic disaster. On the off chance the military and political analysts are right, in the next few months we must test the enemy's intentions in case this is indeed his last big gasp before negotiations. But it is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could. This is Walter Cronkite. Good night.
So Lyndon Johnson was watching that clip in 1968, and when it was over, he turned it off and he turned to his advisors and he said, "If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost Middle America." And 3 weeks later announced that he was not running for office. I don't think that clip is a whole lot less relevant now than it was almost 40 years ago. I don't think it's ideal that it comes to light in the back of a remaindered book in a random used bookstore. Archivists make history. The Librarian of Congress in the 1997 report I mentioned, which I would encourage you all to go take a look at if you're curious about television archiving. It's available online. Noted that at present, chance determines what television programs survive. Future scholars will have to rely on incomplete evidence when they assess the achievements and failures of our culture. E.A. Blair, also known as George Orwell, noted that who controls the past controls the future. I think our future is a little too important to be left to the current systems we have now. I would like to invite anyone here who would like to attend one of two upcoming conferences I'm working on. One is at WNET. It'll be on June 5th and 6th. That'll be primarily a forum for creators and documentary producers, as well as foundation sponsors, educators, and technology companies. That also is on a sponsorship basis, much like the PBS stations. And in September in San Francisco, there's a meeting at KQED that will be more oriented towards television archiving. So please consider yourselves invited to come on down. I will have some public announcements up about that at Archival TV and at Intelligent Television, which is kind of my partner in crime in these sessions. And I would love to see you there. I'd love to interact more and hear what you're doing here at Microsoft. I think you've got a number of different moving parts. I met with somebody down in the valley who said there were 3 different teams that were kind of being reconfigured. But I'd love to hear more about what's going on here and to interact.
First, let's say thank you. Thank you. Questions, queries, comments for Jeff?
Will the slides be available?
Should be on Resident WAC Guide. Yes, it should be up there. Yeah.
The scenarios that DRM solves, and also keep the content available for future archiving.
So I think one thing would be if you can tag it in a certain way, if you can watermark it and note where it came from. That's not quite the same thing as making it unplayable unless you fetch a key from a server. So mainly it's about watermarking.
So that would be the availability to have a source attributed to it. But my question is, the scenarios the DRM is solving of actually being able to play it if you don't have, not be able to play it if you don't have the key as it exists today. That is, limit the current distribution of it.
I guess what I'm saying is I would like to be able to sign my painting. And I don't care how many people take pictures of it. Just being able to sign it is part of what I think DRM is addressing. And it doesn't have to be DRM that does that. Does that make sense?
Yes. My question is more related to how do you solve the other problems that DRM is solving and keep it open?
Oh, okay. Well, that gets back to the economics of open content. And I wish I had better answers for you. I think that partly you see in the nonfiction world that there are a lot of productions that are done for other reasons. So right now, for example, UC Berkeley has rolled out this system where they're videotaping a few hundred hours a month of classroom instruction, and people are thinking about going back to that footage and, curating it in a certain way so that people can get access to it. So one answer is that some footage, a lot of nonfiction footage, is produced for other reasons in other contexts, like this. The question, I think, for entertainment companies may be harder, or is harder. It does seem like the lightweight DRM that iTunes is using is something that people have decided to live with. There's a company in California called Magnatune that works by trying to establish a relationship of trust between the fan and the musician. So they have a model in which they take a 50% royalty and they let users pay what they wish. It's an honor system, kind of like almost a tip jar system. The other way of thinking through the DRM issue is that right now you're not allowed to break it, even for good reason. So in the case of software, the Internet Archive went and got a specific exemption to the copyright statute to allow it to preserve old PC software that was protected by DRM. So that a similar thing has been proposed for video and moving images, and Sony doesn't like it. There's a series of hearings going on now about Section 108, which is essentially exemptions to the Copyright Act for libraries and archives. And the librarians and the archivists say, look, let us make preservation copies that are not encumbered with DRM. We're not going to distribute them to the world. We want to ensure that there's long-term future access for these materials. And there's, in fact, a lot of opposition in the commercial world to that. There's a fear that if there is any exemption at all, that'll open the floodgates in some terrible way. I think there's also an issue of DRM matters for big hits with big budgets, and I think even among fairly staunch copyright defenders in Hollywood, there's a sense that there's some things that don't make a lot of money anyway, and they never will, and it's not worth trying to lock up some of that material. So I think you might be able to make a distinction between material that really needs to be locked up and material that doesn't. I wish I had a better set of answers for you than that. I think this question of how we're going to support a creative class going forward, I think that's really not well answered. It's not well described. The compulsory license pools are another scheme that people are offering, but I think that the danger is that we're going to go down this path of adding DRM to a lot of things, and not only are some large number of people going to rebel against that and try to break those systems and win through essentially technical determinism, but I think that it'll have a bad effect on future holdings and future generations of historians and scholars.
Your comments seemed you were a little skeptical about PBS's sort of economic model, and I was wondering what other alternatives you were thinking about, and also I'm curious about your relationship with PBS because you seem to have something going with it.
Okay, well, I didn't mean to be skeptical about the PBS economic model of membership and sponsorship. I think that's actually really bold and gutsy and good, and the sensibility that comes out of is, gosh, we are about educating the public and supporting culture and providing a forum for creators, and we're not just another media conglomerate. So I think that's all to their credit. What I was somewhat skeptical about was the embrace of OMN, Open Media Network. I don't know how many people here have dealt with VeriSign, but if VeriSign were running, if VeriSign were controlling the system that is used to manage all of PBS content distribution, that would make me feel skeptical.
I think that was a showcase, though. I think the content people just did OMN to showcase it so they could sell it, probably.
Yes, I think it varies from station to station, and I think that there's definitely opportunity for other types of P2P networks to get in there. I don't think that the people that are doing OMN within PBS are intending to give VeriSign perpetual distribution rights over their content. OMN happens to be the one that's in there first. I mean, I think it's kind of a brilliant move on Kontiki's part to create, this blameless, wonderful, social good type beta user that's affiliated with well-known institutions like that.
Great demo where they were able to take tax write-offs against.
That too.
Have you heard of Current TV?
Yes. Based in San Francisco, trying to tap, I think, the user-generated content theme. They're pretty wedded to the standard cable model in a certain way. Like, their stuff is highly packaged. They're sitting on a pile of money, which I think is, sometimes helpful and sometimes dangerous. It can insulate you from reality a little bit.
Just want anybody in the room, anybody not here Current TV?
Al Gore is trying to remake television in a better image.
So independent filmmakers, anybody in this room, you could submit stuff to Current TV, and members, you just get a login. You could view the things that are submitted, and if you like it, you vote it, a green light for it. And if you get enough green lights, then you get on the air on cable TV or satellite, and you get compensated a small fee. And the more you get on the air, the more you make. I think that's a fascinating model.
Yeah.
And have you seen some of these TV shows out there, like Web Junk 20? There's another one on Bravo, I forget the name of it, and there's two more forming where they take the best of the viral videos and they make a TV show out of them because they know you're already going to watch it. And the cost of production for them is like nothing. They just hire a funny comedian like Patrice O'Neill who cracks you up while you watch these funny videos, and then they get their advertising dollars around the TV show.
Yeah. The way reality TV is going to keep changing and evolving, I think, is going to be fun and interesting to watch. But I think you're right. Yeah, the production costs are nothing, and I guess the squick factor is often a little high for me, at least. But okay.
What is the copyright status of these viral videos? Excellent question.
Yeah, well, it depends. In some cases, somebody really owns them. Like, I guess, I don't know. I mean, you could pick, at one end of the extreme, there's the Zapruder film, right, of the Kennedy assassination, which, is, on the one hand, an important public record, and on the other hand, the Zapruder family is pretty fierce about maintaining its copyright and extracting as much money as it possibly can from that film. Then, the stuff that sort of makes it onto stupid videos, which I think is, I've forgotten now, it's like in the top 15 sites. It's another kind of YouTube thing. There's I want to say like a tacit or, an evolving consensus that if you take it down really quick, expeditious takedown will protect you from a lot of bad stuff. But it's hard to know who owns those things, right? There isn't a system of provenance or attribution for most of the video that's out on the net, so there's no way to go back and identify the owner and get a license. There's no easy way to execute the license. It's not clear. I do like the Larry Lessig line, fair use is the right to hire a lawyer. There's no clean way of knowing when you have to license and when you don't.
Well, let's take another step. What about all the audio and video podcasting that's being generated? What's the copyright status of that stuff?
Well, a lot of things are getting Creative Commons click licenses built in. Like you can, if you post using some types of systems like MediaWiki, when you set up your MediaWiki, you can click a checkbox to make all of the material under the GNU public license, or with no licensing material, or with a Creative Commons license. I think there's something similar for WordPress. Do you know, Zach? What that is?
That's not right. I don't know if it's in
So some of the systems that are used to push podcasts out into the world have some licensing material built in. I think a lot of people just want to get heard. I think that's actually one of the things that's interesting in this whole copyright debate. I mean, there's this conceit that if creators are not able to defend their rights the way Sony would like to defend its rights, that all artistic production and all scientific progress will halt tomorrow. No books will be written, no films will be made, nobody does anything for free. And I think one of the reasons why there's a disconnect on some of that material that you're talking about is that the people who are creating it just want it to get seen. They're not trying to really enforce their rights so much as they're trying to gain an audience. Is this a question about what can you do if you want to index it or make it available or rehost it or whatever? Microsoft has put a lot of money into the Open Content Alliance. I guess it's not a lot of money for Microsoft, but it's a lot of money for a small non-profit. And the Open Content Alliance has attracted a large number of libraries and archives to join and come up with a series of principles like no rehosting. And that's intended to sort of address the concerns of a librarian who's just spent their yearly budget at putting this great collection together, and somebody downloads it all and covers it with ads and hosts it somewhere else. So when you make material available according to the principles of the OCA, if you're an OCA member organization, you won't do that. So that's a sort of balance. That's another kind of balancing act that's happening at an institutional level. But the lack of clarity is definitely expensive. It makes it hard to clear material for new works or for classroom use or for anything else. I would love to see something that makes it possible to find the author and maybe donate to the author. That may be part of the system that works. To address your point, make it easy for me to contribute. It seems to work for PBS.
I have a question and then a comment, I think.
Yeah.
So, quick question. Do you know much about the Democracy Player? What's it called?
No.
They have a product that's it's free, open source, cross-platform. It's basically a RSS aggregator, but for media, for videos.
Okay.
You run on your desktop, it's like a TiVo. It's
video
more content overnight.
Yeah.
You can watch it full screen on your PC. It's pretty buggy, but they got hundreds of thousands of downloads of their alpha version. And it's a download battle. People buy
Okay, yes.
Same folks.
They did Broadcast Machine too.
Yes,
so this is like another iteration of that?
Yes, so this is one of their products.
Great.
So the Broadcast Machine, which is a BitTorrent seeding video publishing system. They have Video Bomb, which is basically Dig, but for video files on the web. And then they have the Democracy Player. And then they have basically the equivalent of the iTunes channel guide, but for the Democracy Player.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. The other comment is, relevant to the current TV conversation. So my understanding, a lot of the current TV ideas were based around this media company in South Korea called Oh My News, which kind of pioneered this model of user-submitted content to an editorial staff choosing which content gets published in the magazine. And it's kind of this interesting marriage of user-generated content and edited and edited publication. It's actually the #1 news source on the web in Korea at this point, and all of the content is user submitted. It's a pretty amazing story.
What's that called again?
ohmynews.com. ohmynews, OHMY news. Go to english.ohmynews.com. There's an English version of it. But
thanks.
But one interesting story from Oh My News is they are, I've heard this, are accredited with the highest paying story ever, which was something over $15,000. So the way it worked was they implemented a tip jar on all stories. And so you can tip the author if you really like the story. And one story, just everyone loved it. The guy got $15,000 in a week. Just because people just gave him like $3 at a time.
That's great.
How does the service make money?
So they run ads. They're a pretty traditional media company from some respects. They get a lot of viewers and they run a lot of ads and they support themselves that way. And the people they hire on staff are just editors now, basically. They maintain the website, they edit it, they publish it, and maintain the ad network. And then all the content comes from the users. So literally citizens, just like housewives and school teachers submit content to Oh My News. If the editor staff likes it, they'll publish it maybe on the front page, and overnight you have an audience of 100,000 people. Current TV is the video version of that. It was intended to be the video version of that.
Sure. And also, participatory culture, basic support stuff. You're familiar with that?
Yeah, it's the same. Mitch Kapoor put in some money into the PCF's democracy project.
Way to get through these two presentations, our morning presentation, and
let us pause for a moment and declare this now officially done. Victory, yes, thank you. For those who are interested, I think there's an